In this demo, we'd like to show how we can implement an adapter to a database using Camel. So we'll start by creating a new project of type Fuse. Okay, we will use the domain-specific language implemented in Java. Let's call the group ID demo, and the artifact ID should be object relation mapping. Okay, after building with Maven the project, we have a warning because it's using Java 1.6, so we'll change the library. As you can see, it uses Java 1.6, but we don't have it, we just have Java 7. Okay, so what we'd like to do would be to expose a service which will allow us to search in a database that contains a list of cities. Okay, so let's define a model for that. So I will just create a new simple class, let's call it city, and I have a table which contains the name of the city. First of all, it contains an integer which is the ID. It also contains a name for the city, also the name of the district which the city belongs to, and it contains also a number of inhabitants. But this will be actually a long, and I would say this as well. So I will generate for this class, I will generate getters and setters as being the last member in the class, and I will select getters and setters for it. Okay, and this is my simple model. So I would like to be able to execute a request against the database and get the data for cities and expose a service. So I'll go to the project object model file, and in here I have the dependency to my runtime, and this is the version for Camel runtime. I will just create a property for it. Let's call it camel.version, and this is going to be the value. And with this value I can go and modify the dependencies to use the variable. So this will have the camel version. Okay, and as well for the tests. In order to use the SQL component, I will need to add a new dependency which has the group ID org.apache.camel. The component is called camel.sql and with the appropriate version. Now when I save, my project is gonna drag all the dependencies that the Camel SQL has, and after doing the build I will have the new component attached to my build path, and I will be able to use it. I'm going to expose a service which will be consumed as a REST endpoint, and also I will have a page as a form to search. So for that I will need another component. So it's the same group ID, the artifact ID. I'm going to use Jetty in order to host the service. So it's doing the build again to get the dependencies for Jetty. Okay, and in the meantime I would like to define my route. So let's go to the route builder as long as we are waiting for the build to finish. But in the meantime I'd like to define my route. So first of all I need to configure my component. in order to define the access to the database. So I would like to configure my SQL component. Let's call it component. And if I get the context of my route builder, I can access the Camel registry and ask for a component for the given schema. So my schema, it's registered with SQL prefix. And because I know that's going to return a SQL component, I will just ask the registry to provide me the reference to the SQL component that's registered for this schema. Okay. In order to configure the access to the database, I will need to define a driver manager data source. So let's define this driver manager data source. That's a property bag, what I'm defining here actually. I only need to set up what's required by the JDBC connection. So let's say that I will set the driver class name, and because I'm going to use MySQL, that should be com.mysql.jdbc.driver. Next, I'll have to set up the URL of my data source connection, so I will just set the URL. In my case, it's JDBC MySQL. I'm going to use a connection that's actually it's not running on this machine, so I'll just get the IP of my host. Oh, come on, config, okay. And my host, it's running on a different machine, which is on Windows 7. So this is going to be the connection. That's the default port I'm using, and I have a database called cities. Next, with this data source, I will set the username as being root, and the data source also requires a password, and in my case this is the password, and I'm not using a configuration file for that. That's just for demo purposes. Okay, then after configuring my data source, I will just set the data source of my component to be this data source. So this is the basic configuration I will do normally. So I'd like to publish a form, and the form should work like this. I'll have an endpoint to access the form, and I will use Jetty just to serve the static content of the form. If I have a query parameter defined for my request to the form, instead of reading the form and returning the content of the file, I will just return the result of executing the query. So let's publish an endpoint with Jetty on HTTP localhost on port 8080, and let's call the endpoint index.html. So when I receive a call to this, first of all, I will do a process. And I will create my processor to extract the name from the request. So name, I will create a name extractor processor. Okay, this class doesn't exist. I will create it and need to have to implement the processor interface. So it will return an exchange. The idea is that with this class, I will extract from the request, I will extract the query parameter called name. So my exchange contains, with my exchange, I can access the in message, and I can ask to get the body, and I know for sure that is going to be an HTTP message, because this is what Camel, what Jetty will provide. So this is going to be an HTTP message. Let's call it message. Then from my message I can get the request and I can look for the parameter called, let's say, name, and this will have a string value, and this is going to be the name provided for the request, the additional parameter. Okay, after extracting this, I will just set for the in message a header called name, okay, with the appropriate value. That's going to be the name extracted from the request. And this is actually what the name extractor processor is going to do. Okay, so let's go back to our root. Okay, so the build finished. Now, after extracting the name from the request, I will need to check and see whether or not the value is present. So when I do have the name, and I will check that my header by the name is not null, then I can do my processing, and in this case, if so, I would like to first execute a SQL statement and then deserialize the results. Okay, but the problem is that when I'm gonna send this, actually I have to send my exchange to something like this. In order to execute a query with a query component, I will write my query inside here. But this URL is not static, and I need to configure this by the input from the exchange. In order to do so, I would like to use a dynamic router as a recipient list, and I will create the list using a class, and let's call my class query builder. This is not created, and the method get URI. Okay, so I create the query builder. That's a simple bin, and I also need to create my method to get the URI. Okay, so this can be a static method which will return an array of string, because eventually what this recipient list will expect would be either a string value containing the concatenation by comma of all the endpoints that the message need to be delivered to. But in my case, if I will return a simple string, then the recipient list will try to split what I'm returning by the comma, and of course in my case I would have inside my select statement a lot of commas. So this is not what I expect, because if the recipient list will split by the comma, then it will just split my statement, and it will take the parts of my statement by the comma as being the endpoints where the message the exchange needs to be delivered. So in my case, I will return an array of strings saying, okay, I know that you are expecting an array of strings. I'm not returning a string. I'm not letting you splitting the value I'm returning, but this is what you need actually in the end. Okay, So in order to have access to the exchange, I will just use a parameter here, and I'm returning a new static array of strings. And as you can expect, I'll have to create my query. So here I will return only one element, which will be the endpoint to execute the select. So I'm selecting the ID, the name of the city, district, and the number of inhabitants from a table called cities, and I can order them by the name. However, I'm not selecting all the values, but I will select only those that are matching the keyword. So let's get the name from the request. My exchange contains an input message, and from this input message I can get the value of the header called name, and I know this should be a string. So okay, and I will use this in order to inject into my query. So I will select those where the name is like my value. Okay, so this should be like this. I will concatenate this with my value for the name, and then I will order the result by the name. Okay, so now when the query parameter will be present, then I will route this to the method. And what's gonna happen with the return, with the result, is that this will create a list of cities, will deserialize what was extracted from the database, will fetch the results. But in the end, I would like to serialize this as a JSON. So I'll marshal this as JSON. And for that, I will use the JSON library called Jackson. In order to have the support for Jackson, I will need to go to my project object model, the dependencies, and add the dependency to the artifact which has the group ID org.apache.camel. The artifact ID should be camel minus Jackson, and the version should be camel.version. And now I'm saving this in order to do the build with Maven and get the appropriate dependencies. So with this, I will return a JSON with all the results. Otherwise, in case so this will be my when. So when this will happen, I will just do the mapping like this. But then, and this will end the statement. Okay, but otherwise, so actually I think it's better for us to split this route and to actually send this to a direct endpoint that will execute the query, and we'll have a consumer for this direct endpoint to execute the query. Okay, so this will be what we do in case we have the information. So we will serialize the responses JSON, but otherwise I will just send this to a different endpoint, which will be a direct endpoint, to send the form page. Okay, so in order to send the form page, we will have a consumer endpoint for the producer for send form page. We'll just create a processor to read a file. So for this we will do a process, and we will create a new file reader processor. So I have to create this processor. Okay, so in here, in case I have the query parameter, I will execute the query with it and return JSON. Otherwise, I will just read the form and I will deliver to the browser the content of the form. My file reader processor, that's a simple one. This is the exchange actually. What is supposed to do? I will just create a string builder, not string buffer, I don't need it to be synchronized, so I'll create string builder. Let's create the new string builder. And I will try to create a buffered reader just to read each line from my file. Okay, and first, before that actually, I will need to create an input stream. Let's call it stream. And I will use the file reader processor class to get a resource as stream. So I will just ask for a file called index.html from my source, and with this I would like to do some processing. Okay, so this says that I require Java 1.7, so I will just go to my project properties in here, and I will go to the compiler, and I would like to be compliant with Java 1.7, and this will rebuild the project. Okay, so now when I'm doing that, I will create a reader on top of a new input stream reader on top of my stream, and with this reader I'd like to go and read my file. So this should be what I'm gonna do. I will just separate the lines with the default separator, so I will create a line separator variable, constant. So with system I get the property, so I get the property line dot separator, and now I read all the lines in my file. So I will have something like while true. I will just read a line with reader.readLine, and if the line is null, then I reach the end of the file, so I will do a break. Otherwise, I will just append to my builder the line, and then I will continue to append the line separator. Okay, so in the end, after reading the file, I'll just set in the body of my input message the result. So I'll set the body as being the builder.toString. So this is reading the file. Now I only have to create the file at the same level with my class, because I'm just accessing the resource with my file reader processor class. So in here I will just create a new HTML file. Let's create a new file, call it index.html. Okay, so it will try to open my HTML editor, and eventually I'll go to the source. Come on. That's not nice. So let's just try to open this again and go to the source. So what I'd like to have here, that's gonna be a simple HTML file. Let's write it together. An HTML. Inside here I'll have the head of the document and the body, and in the body I'd like to have a simple form. Like for instance, I would like to have a div here, and in my div I will just write some text, add an input. Let's call this, oh, city, it's okay. So then I will need an additional divider with the ID results that will hold my results. But then I will need to include jQuery in order to manipulate DOM. So I'll have a script. The type is obviously, so anyway, I can have it, but it doesn't matter. So I'll just reference the jQuery. So in order to get the URL for jQuery, I'll go to Chrome. I don't care about this. So I'll just search for jQuery, and from here I can go to the download and I will copy the URL, eventually the compressed URL. And with this link I go to my IDE and I just paste it here. And I can create a controller for the page, but I don't, that's just a simple demo. What I'd like to have here, when the DOM is loaded, so on the document ready event, I have a function, and my function will supposed to subscribe to all the events that can change the value of the input. So I will just access my div by the ID city, and I will bind a handler for the event change when the value has changed, and this is happening after the control will lose focus. When I am pasting something in my control, or even when I do release a key. So for those events I would like to register a function. Okay, so this function will actually execute the request. I'd like to get the name as being the value of my input, so this will be the context in which the handler executes. And then after getting the value that's entered by the user, I'd like to do an AJAX call of type get to an URL that contains the parameter name with the appropriate value entered by the user, and a callback with the result, which will contain actually all the cities. So I didn't implement this, as you can see here. In my route, I only have, in case I do have the name parameter, then I execute the query, then I marshal the result. But we forgot to do something actually, because when I execute the query, I will get a list of objects but I need to deserialize them according to my model. Otherwise, I won't have the model in my JSON. So we will implement this, but let's finish the form. Okay. So when I do the query and I get the results in here, I'd like to create a table. So I'll just create a table with jQuery by simply creating a table tag. And then eventually I can set some properties like cell spacing to be 5 pixels. Then I'd like to create a row in the same way with jQuery. So I'm creating a table row, and then I append to this row a bunch of so I append to this row some table cells. So I have to create a table cell. So that's gonna be the table cell itself. I can say as a property that I would like to have the no-wrap property set, no-wrap set to true. But my cell will contain a header. Actually, this is the header, and I would like to add the header inside a bold tag. Okay, so for that, this is my cell, and I will append to my cell. So this is the cell that's created by jQuery. Now I'm appending to this a new tag created also with jQuery. So this will be the bold, and the bold will have a property for the text, and this is gonna be first the name of the city. Okay, so let's call this name actually, and then I can continue to append to my row because this will return the row itself. I'll continue to append a new cell, this time with the name, the header district. But then I will continue to append some more lines, some more another cell for the inhabitants. Okay, so after doing that, I will just append to the table my row. Okay, but then I need to go through all my items, through all my cities, and add a new row accordingly. So then I will do an each with jQuery. I need to deserialize the cities, so I'll just parse my cities, which is actually a JSON object, and I will visit each of them with a function that's going to create a new row and append the row to the table. So this will create a new row like this. Okay, and it will append the necessary information. In the end it will append the row to my table, but in here I won't use bold anymore, so I'll just forget about this. Actually, this is what I need to do. Okay, so in here I'll just set the text of my my table cell to be the city dot name property. I'll do a copy paste like this. This would be the district, and in here I will have the number of inhabitants. Okay, so that's how I'm consuming the result. But what I said before is that when I execute a query with this, I will obtain an object which is not a city. So I'll do a process here, and I will create a new results processor class, okay, which should implement the processor interface, so it will get an exchange as argument. So my results processor actually will have to create a bunch of cities. So let's create here a list of all cities, and I will create an array list of city, of course. I can omit to write the city in here. Now I like to get the results of the query. Those would be an object, and actually because I have multiple lines, so I expect to have multiple lines. Even if I don't have multiple lines, what I will get after executing the query would be a list of rows, and each row would be a map of key value pairs. So those will be my results. These results are in the input message. So I can get the body, and I would like to cast what this returns to this type. Okay. Of course, I know that what I'm casting has the correct type. Now, all I have to do is to go through each line and iterate with each result from the results. And for each result, I will fetch a city. So I will just have a city here. I'll have a method fetch, which will actually get a city from this object. The method doesn't exist. Now I created it. And then I will just add my city to the list of cities. In the end, I will return a static array of cities. So, sorry, I will convert this to an array by creating a static city array with the size of the cities. So this is, I forgot that my process method does not return something. So all I have to do is to set to the input message of my exchange the body according to what I processed. Okay, so I'm not returning something, but rather I'm changing the body of the result of the input message to be this one. Okay, so now what I have to do here, that's gonna be easy. I will have first to create a city. Okay, so now I have a city, but then this city would be returned. In the meantime, I'll have to go through all the properties that my let's call the property key that my result contains. So I'll go to the key set of my result, and I know that I will get the value with the result for that property. So I will get the property for the key, and then I need to check. I'm selecting the ID as well. So if the ID equals the key, then all I have to do is to set the ID of the city to be, and I need to convert to long. So I'll convert to long the value of the property. Okay, and then I'll do the same for the rest of the properties. Like for instance, if the name of the key would be name, then I will convert to string the value, and I will set the name of the city like this. Also, if the name of the property would be district, then I will set the district, which is also a string. And then for the inhabitants, I need to set the inhabitants, but but in this case the value is a long value. Okay, so as you can see, the SQL component in Camel, it's executing a query and returns a list of key value pairs. When we deserialize, we visit this item, and according to each property, we map between the property and our object model. So after doing that, now after processing the result, we will have a list of cities. And when we serialize this as JSON, we will have an array, of course, with the properties for each item according to our model. So we will have the name, district, and so on. We don't use the ID, but the rest of the properties, we do use them in order to display in the result. Now, let's try and see how it works. So I will just run this as a Java application, and I can see in my console that I have a problem with my driver because I didn't add dependency to my SQL. That's right. Okay, we forgot to do that also. So let's go to the Maven dependency. So I will just check for MySQL Java connector Maven dependency, and I go to the main Maven repository. I see that's version, the latest one, and I only need to add this. So this would be actually, this would be the artifact ID. So I go to my ID, I edit the project object model file, go to the dependencies and add a new dependency with group MySQL. This would be the name of the artifact, and this would be the version. Okay, so I need to do that before configuring my component. Okay, so now it builds my project and gets the additional dependencies. Okay, now let's run it again. Okay, so now my integration starts. Okay, and I will just try to access in the browser on localhost on 8080 port the index.html form. As you can see, this was served by my static processor, the file reader processor. So in here, actually what happened was that I accessed the URL without the name query parameter. So because the name is not present in the request, it will go to this endpoint, and from here it will execute the file reader processor just to deliver the form. Okay, but now when I'm trying to enter some data, then it will actually try to execute the request, and we do have an issue with the request. Okay, so it says that we have a problem with the name property. Okay, and let's check our query again. I will just close this, and first let's check that we do have a valid query. So in our query builder, let's get rid of this order in here. Okay, where name like this one. Okay, so now let's just run the integration again, and then refresh the page and try to execute this. So we still have the problem because I didn't do much on the query. No, that's not the problem. So we don't display the result. Okay, let's do a JavaScript debugging. Let's go to our browser and check what happened, what went wrong. Okay, so in our sources, as you can see, we are just let's enlarge it a little bit. So what we do, actually, we are getting the value, and then we are executing the request. As you can see, the value now is empty. Okay, That's strange. So the value of this, let's evaluate this again, but now the context is changed. And of course, if I do so, this would not be what we expect. So let's do the debugging again. But this time, check the value first, like in here. I will just refresh the page and enter something here. So let's evaluate in our console this. This is the input, okay, that's correct. But then let's get the value of the input, which should be what we entered, and evaluating console this as well. So it's B. Okay, now when we execute this, we are executing the request. Okay, so let's go to this, and my result contained the list of cities. That's correct. It was executed, it was serialized as JSON, that's fine. So I'm trying to create a table, and I will go step by step. I'm creating the row. Now I'm adding all the header elements. I forgot something actually, that's embarrassing. I forgot to display the table, so that's the problem. Okay, thanks God, it was just simple as that. Anyway, this demo, it's quite simple, so it's basic, but we just have to pay attention. So I forgot in the end, as you can see here, I'm creating the table, I'm creating the header, I'm appending each row, but in the end, I forgot to display it. So we have in our page a container for the results. All I have to do is set the HTML of the container to be this tag, the table. So now when I run finally the integration again, okay, and I will refresh the page, get rid of the debugger. Each time I hit something, it will then execute the query on the server side, and eventually it will filter my results as so. Okay, those are numbers, should be aligned accordingly, but nevertheless I will do this as well, this just for displaying the results. So this header should be aligned, so in here I will align it, I'll align it to the right. And of course, this value as well should be aligned to the right. Okay, and now I can refresh the page, and in the end, this value will be aligned properly. Okay, so I don't know. As you can see, it works. That's all.